The call came in at 6:37 on a Tuesday morning. I know the exact time because I was standing at the coffee machine in the break room at the Federal Building downtown, watching the little clock on the microwave, thinking about how I had exactly 13 minutes before my shift briefing started. My phone buzzed against my hip. Unknown number. I almost didn't pick up. "Is this Caleb?" A woman's voice. Shaking. "Yes." "Who is this?" "This is Nurse Patton at Riverside Memorial. You're listed as emergency contact for a Brooke Hartwell." My coffee hit the floor. Brooke is my little sister. She's 22, works as a teacher's aide at Millbrook Elementary, takes the Route 9 county bus every morning because she never got her driver's license, something her mom teased her about every Thanksgiving without fail. Brooke laughed it off every time. She said she liked watching the world go by from a window seat. She said driving was stressful and the bus was peaceful. The nurse told me there had been an incident. She used that word. Incident, like it was a fender bender. Like someone had rear-ended somebody at a stoplight. "What kind of incident?" I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. "Sir, the Route 9 bus was fired upon this morning near the Crestfield overpass. Your sister sustained a gunshot wound to her left shoulder. She's in surgery right now. She's..." The nurse hesitated, and I felt my entire chest collapse in that half-second, "She's stable." "But sir, I need you to come in." I was already moving. I don't remember the drive. I remember pulling into the hospital parking garage going probably 50 in a 20, and I remember my hands shaking so bad I dropped my keys twice getting out of the car. The ER waiting area smelled like antiseptic and burned coffee, and a woman near the door was crying into her husband's shoulder about something I didn't understand, and it all felt underwater, like everything was muffled and slow and wrong. The nurse at the desk told me Brooke was the only person on that bus who survived. I made her repeat it. She did. There were 7 other passengers, all gone. A retired school teacher named Mrs. Aldrich, who Brooke had mentioned to me once, said she rode the same bus every day for 11 years. A college kid with earbuds in. A construction worker. 4 others whose names I didn't know yet, but whose families were, at that moment, getting the same kind of calls I almost didn't pick up. Brooke had been sitting in the very back. The shooter, or shooters, the police didn't know yet, had unloaded through the front windows. The driver was killed instantly. The bus drifted into a guardrail. Someone passing on the highway called 911. By the time the ambulance arrived, Brooke had dragged herself behind the last row of seats and applied pressure to her own wound with her jacket. She was conscious when they loaded her into the ambulance. She asked the paramedic if the teacher made it. She already knew. She asked anyway. I sat in that waiting room for 2 hours and 40 minutes before a surgeon came out and told me the bullet had missed everything critical, that she would need physical therapy for her shoulder, that she was going to be all right. I thanked him. I shook his hand. I walked to the men's room and stood over the sink and sobbed until I couldn't breathe. Then I pulled myself together and went to find a detective. There was one on site already, a heavy-set man in a gray sport coat named Tully. He had a foam coffee cup in one hand and a notepad in the other, and he looked at me the way people look at someone they've already decided they don't have time for. I told him I wanted to know what was being done. I told him I worked for the Federal Building downtown, that I knew people, that I wanted answers. He didn't react to any of that. He just watched me with flat eyes and wrote something in his notepad that I'm pretty sure was not what I was saying. "We're aware of the incident," he said. There was that word again. 7 people are dead, I said. "We're aware. My sister is in surgery. We're aware of that too, son. Don't call me son. What gang did this? What leads do you have?" He sighed through his nose like I was a mildly inconvenient piece of furniture. Then he said something that I've replayed in my head every single day since. He said, "Look, I'm going to be straight with you because I think you're the kind of guy who can handle straight talk. The Crestfield corridor has been Vega territory for 6 years. That bus runs through their turf. Whatever happened out there this morning, it's connected to something we don't have jurisdiction to touch. My advice, get your sister healthy, be grateful she made it, and go home." I stared at him. He took a sip of his coffee. "You're telling me to go home," I said. 7 people are dead on a public bus, and you're telling me to go home. I'm telling you how it is. Who authorized you to tell me that? Who told you to stand here and say that to a victim's family? He didn't answer. He closed his notepad. He walked away. I stood in that corridor for a long time after he left. I know what it means when a cop tells you to go home. I know what it means when law enforcement in a city casually references which gang controls which neighborhood, like it's a known fact. Like it's a natural feature of the landscape, like mountains or rivers. It means the system has already decided those streets belong to someone else. It means the people on that bus were considered acceptable losses before the call even came in. I also knew that if I wanted anything done, I was going to have to make a phone call I had been avoiding for almost 4 years. My father and I have not been close. That's the cleanest way to put it. The longer version involves years of him being absent. Not in a deadbeat way, not in a I never cared way, but in the way that someone who spent 3 decades commanding naval special operations simply does not know how to be present at a high school graduation, or a Christmas dinner, or any moment that doesn't require tactical precision and emotional discipline. My father is Admiral James Hartwell, retired. He served 31 years in the Navy, the last 12 of which he spent running covert counter-narcotics operations across the Western Hemisphere. When he retired 4 years ago, he did not call to tell me. I found out from a news article. He has a ranch now in the Texas Hill Country. He raises cattle and does consulting work that I'm fairly sure involves things he can't discuss. We speak maybe twice a year. The last real conversation we had was at my mother's funeral, 3 years ago, standing in the parking lot of the church in our suits, both of us completely unable to find a single useful thing to say. I sat in the hospital parking garage for 20 minutes before I dialed his number. He picked up on the second ring. Caleb. He always answers like he already knows it's going to be something serious. I told him everything. I told him about the call, the bus, the 7 dead passengers, Brooke's shoulder, the surgery, Detective Tully and his foam coffee cup and his flat eyes and his advice to go home. I told it all in one long, steady stream because I knew if I stopped, I might not start again. My father was quiet for a few seconds after I finished. Then he said, "Which hospital?" "Riverside Memorial." "But I'll be there in 4 hours. I'm not asking you to come here. I'm asking if you know Caleb." His voice was the same tone he used when I was 12 and I had done something he needed me to pay attention to. Quiet. Exact. "I'm already moving. Don't touch anything. Don't talk to any more police. Don't go near the Crestfield area. Understood?" I said understood. He was there in 3 hours and 40 minutes. I didn't recognize him for a second when he walked through the hospital entrance. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him. His hair completely white now, but he moved the same way he always did. Like a man who has never once in his life entered a room without knowing exactly where every exit was. He was wearing jeans and boots and a plain jacket, and nobody would have looked at him twice. And yet 3 nurses stopped what they were doing to watch him cross the lobby. He didn't hug me. We don't really do that. He put his hand on my shoulder and looked at me and said, "How is she?" I told him she was out of surgery, stable, sedated. "Good," he said. "Now show me where the detective is." Tully was not hard to find. He was still on the floor, talking to another officer near the vending machines. My father walked up to him and introduced himself by his full rank and name, which he virtually never does in civilian settings. I watched Tully's expression shift in real time, confusion, then recognition, then something I can only describe as a man realizing he's been standing in the wrong place. "Admiral," Tully said. "I'd like the full incident report," my father said. "The unredacted one. I'd also like the name of whoever instructed officers to advise victim families against pursuing further investigation. I'll wait." Tully opened his mouth. My father waited. 20 minutes later, we had a folder. We sat in a consultation room the hospital offered us, and my father read through the report the way I imagine he read through mission briefings, completely still, no reaction on his face, eyes moving at a steady pace. I sat across from him and watched him and thought about all the years I'd spent being angry at this man, all the dinners he missed, all the phone calls that went to voicemail, all the moments I needed a father and got silence. When he finished reading, he set the report on the table and said, "The Vega organization has been running fentanyl through the Crestfield corridor for 3 years. DEA had an informant embedded. Someone in the department burned the informant 6 months ago. This shooting was a message, not to your sister, not to that bus, to the informant's handler, who lives 2 blocks from the Route 9 stop." I stared at him. 8 people died on a bus as a message to 1 person. Yes, and the department knows this. Elements of the department. Not all. Enough? I felt sick. I felt the kind of sick that sits in your stomach like something cold and heavy and doesn't move. 8 people. A retired school teacher. A college kid with earbuds in. Brooke with her window seat and her jacket pressed against her shoulder in the back of a drifting bus. "What are you going to do?" I said. My father looked at me. He said, "What I do." I learned over the next 72 hours that my father's consulting work involves a network I genuinely do not have the clearance to fully understand. I know he made calls. I was in the room for some of them. clipped precise conversations with people he addressed only by last name, sometimes by what I assume were operational nicknames. He had a laptop open on the table and maps on the screen, and at some point a man in civilian clothes who said nothing to me and nothing to the nurses arrived at the hospital with a hard case that he handed to my father and left. My father did not explain what was in it. What I know is this. On the third morning after the shooting, I was sitting with Brooke in her hospital room. She was awake and eating terrible hospital oatmeal and complaining about the TV remote not working, which felt so profoundly normal that I nearly lost it all over again. My father stepped out to take a call. He was gone for 11 minutes. When he came back, he sat down in the chair in the corner and folded his hands and said nothing. 2 hours later, my phone started going off with news alerts. Federal authorities had executed simultaneous raids on 14 locations across the city. The Vega organization's leadership, 6 men, including the 2 individuals identified as having organized the Route 9 shooting, were in federal custody. 3 law enforcement officers from the city's narcotics division had been placed on administrative leave, pending investigation into evidence tampering and obstruction. Detective Tully was one of them, the DEA special agent who had been identified as the handler whose informant was burned. A woman named Agent Carver, who I would later learn had been fighting internally for 6 months to get someone to listen to her, was quoted in the federal press release as saying that the operation had been supported by intelligence provided through authorized channels she was not at liberty to specify. I looked at my father. He was watching the news on Brooke's broken TV. He'd fixed the remote, apparently sometime while I wasn't paying attention. "Dad," I said. He looked at me. "The men who organized this," I said. "All 6 of them. In custody," he said. "Federal charges, no bail. And the officers, bail be indicted. The evidence is complete." I sat with that for a minute. Outside the hospital window, the sky was doing that thing it does in October in this part of the country, clouds moving fast over a blue that's almost too bright, like the world is trying to look innocent. I thought about Brooke asking the paramedic about the teacher. I thought about the 7 families who didn't get the phone call I got, who got the other kind. "How did you do this in 3 days?" I said. My father was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been watching the Vega organization for 2 years. Not officially. When I retired, there were things I was tracking that I couldn't hand off cleanly. I kept watching." "Why didn't you?" I stopped. I started again. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "I told people," he said. "The right people couldn't hear it. The wrong people could." I understood then. I understood that this man, who I had spent years believing was simply absent, had been operating in a world so far removed from birthday dinners and graduation ceremonies that the 2 things simply could not coexist. I'm not saying that makes it right. I'm not saying the anger I carried was invalid. I am saying that I sat in that hospital room and looked at my father and understood, for the first time, something true about him that I'd been refusing to see. Brooke was released 8 days after the shooting. I drove her home. She's staying with me now, through the physical therapy, probably for a few months. On the drive, she was quiet for a while, and then she said, "Is Dad coming to visit?" I said I didn't know. She looked out the window. Then she said, "I want to see him." I called him that evening. He answered on the second ring. I told him Brooke wanted to see him, and he said, "I'll drive up Saturday." He did. He sat at my kitchen table and drank the coffee I made. Badly, he noted, with the particular diplomatic honesty he's always had about things that don't matter, and Brooke sat across from him with her arm in its sling, and they talked for 3 hours. I mostly stayed out of it. I washed dishes I'd already washed. I reorganized things in the pantry. I found reasons to be in adjacent rooms. At some point, I stood in the hallway and listened to my sister laugh at something my father said. And the sound of it hit me somewhere I wasn't prepared for. The 6 Vega members entered federal plea agreements 4 months later. Sentences ranging from 22 years to life, depending on their level of involvement in the Route 9 attack and other operations. The 3 corrupt officers, Tully and 2 others, were convicted on federal obstruction and racketeering charges. They are serving 8 to 14 years. Agent Carver was promoted. I read about it in a brief in a federal law enforcement newsletter I have no professional reason to be reading. She gave a short statement about the importance of interagency cooperation that I'm fairly confident she wrote very carefully. Brooke finished physical therapy in February. She got full range of motion back in her shoulder. She went back to work at Millbrook in March. She still takes the bus. She says she likes watching the world go by from a window seat. I asked my father once, a few months after everything settled, how he had known to move so fast. How he had known that 3 days was the window. He said something I've thought about many times since. He said the people who run organizations like the Vega network understand one thing above everything else: momentum. If you let them reset after an action, they go dark, restructure, move assets. You lose them. The only way to stop them is to hit before they believe anyone capable of hitting them even knows they exist. He paused and then said, "They thought I was retired. I'm still working through what my father is, not as a parent. I've made a certain amount of peace with that, enough to have dinner with him every few weeks now, enough that Brooke has him in her phone under a contact name I'm not allowed to see. But as a person, as someone who has spent his entire adult life operating in spaces most people don't know exist, making decisions that never appear in any public record, carrying information that has weight and consequence and no outlet, I don't know if that's heroic or something more complicated. I know that 7 families got a different call than I did, and nothing my father did or could do will change that. I know that justice, whatever it ends up looking like in a courtroom, doesn't reach into a hospital waiting room and put back what got taken. But I also know that the men responsible are in federal prison, that the officers who protected them are in federal prison, that a federal agent who spent 6 months being ignored finally got heard, and that my sister sat at my kitchen table last Sunday and ate bad takeout and argued with me about a TV show and laughed at something our father said over speakerphone. That's what I have. That's what I'm holding on to. If you're sitting somewhere right now and you've got a family member who's been failed by the system, who's been told by someone with a notepad and a foam coffee cup to go home and be grateful, I want you to know that I understand that feeling. I lived inside it for 2 hours in a hospital corridor, and it is one of the most isolating, suffocating feelings a person can carry. I also want you to tell you that the man I called has spent the last 40 years making sure that the people who believe they are untouchable eventually learn otherwise. The Vega organization believed they owned the Crestfield corridor. They believed wrong. There's something I keep coming back to months after all of it. Detective Tully told me to go home. He said it like it was advice, like he was doing me a favor. And the thing is, if you'd asked me 2 days before that phone call whether I was the kind of person who would push back against that, I honestly don't know what I would have said. I'd like to think yes. But fear has a way of making people smaller than they intend to be. I know that now in a way I didn't before. What I've been sitting with is this. Every outcome in that situation, good and bad, was the direct result of choices made by real people over a long stretch of time. The Vega organization didn't appear overnight. They built their operation through years of calculated decisions. The corrupt officers who protected them made a choice, probably small at first, probably something they told themselves was manageable. Detective Tully made a choice every single morning he drove to that precinct and decided the Crestfield corridor wasn't worth the trouble. Choices compound. They accumulate weight, and eventually that weight lands somewhere, on a school bus, on a Tuesday morning, on 7 people who had nothing to do with any of it. My father made choices too. For 31 years, he made choices that most people will never know about, in places most people will never see, for reasons that don't fit on a commendation plaque. I spent a long time resenting the consequences of those choices, the empty seat at the table, the voicemails that went unreturned, the particular loneliness of having a father who was technically present in the world, but unreachable in every way that mattered to me as a kid. I'm not going to pretend that resentment was wrong. It wasn't. But resentment, I've learned, is only useful for a limited time. After that, it just becomes a story you tell yourself to avoid seeing something more complicated. The more complicated thing is this. My father had spent 2 years quietly tracking the organization that shot my sister. Not because he knew she would be on that bus, because he understood, through decades of hard experience, that networks like the Vega operation eventually hurt someone, and the people with the knowledge to stop them have a responsibility to act on it, whether or not the system makes room for that action. That's not heroism. That's just a person deciding that what they know obligates them to do something. That distinction matters to me. Brooke asked me once, during her physical therapy, whether I thought any of it was fair. I told her I didn't think fairness was the right frame. Fair implies a referee, some outside force keeping score. What I believe in is consequence. That actions produce outcomes, that sustained effort in a particular direction eventually changes the shape of things. The men who ordered that attack are in federal prison, not because the system worked the way it's supposed to, because one person had spent years building the knowledge and the network to act when the system refused to. I don't have a clean English word for it that captures the full weight, but it's something like the will to continue past the point where continuing makes obvious sense. My father had it in the operational sense. Burke had it on the floor of that bus. What I'm working on is having it in the ordinary sense. Showing up, staying honest about what I know and what I owe, not letting the easier story replace the true one. That's all I've got. It's enough to work with.